Paul rebuked Peter right to his face. And the reason why he rebuked Peter to his face was because he was to be blamed. Like we've seen in all the verses leading up to verse 14, we can see that Paul had a gospel. That gospel he believed he got from God, and he wasn't going to let anything interfere into that. And he's now put the whole history on what took place in his rebuke to Peter, in his trip to Jerusalem, and all of that, his whole encounter with Peter in Antioch. He writes all of that. Why? Because he wants the people in Galatia to understand what is going on. He doesn't want them to make decisions based on lies, and he doesn't want them to lose the power of the gospel. He doesn't want them to fall from grace. Now, let us read Galatians 2, verse 14. But when I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before all of them, if you, being a Jew, lives after the manner of Gentiles, and not as do the Jews, why compel you, the Gentiles, to live as do the Jews? Now, this was really such a harsh rebuke. So what was taking place is, and this is the assumption I make, is that there were certain very powerful people that were in Jerusalem, and they were from James. They were really heavy into being believers, being a believer in Jesus Christ, yet not subsiding from all the customs of Moses. And they were here to get the Gentiles to become Jews. And that would be through circumcision, following the customs of Moses. And since they are then righteous according to Jewish custom, they now qualify for a Messiah, or they will be part of the rule of the Messiah, and so will they be saved. They didn't believe that righteousness was by faith. They believed that righteousness was by obedience to the law, and once you are righteous according to the law, then you can be saved by the Messiah, because then you qualify for a Messiah, since they believed that the Messiah was only the Messiah of the Jews and not that of all people. Now, these powerful, influential Jewish believers came down to Antioch. Now, Peter was under their influence when he was in Jerusalem. We can see that, definitely. He knew them. But when Peter came alone to Paul and the church in Antioch there, he was eating with the Jews, eating with the Gentiles. He was a Jew eating with the Gentiles. And Paul says there were other Jews there as well. And there was a good understanding amongst one another, understanding the agreement that there was, that they came to in Jerusalem. But now, when these powerful men came, what happened? They ran away. And that running away was not merely saying, well, we don't eat at the same table. All of a sudden, it was part of what I would call an outreach from Jerusalem, wherein they were now Judifying, if you can call it like that, or Judaizing the Gentile believers. And this caused a great upset in the heart of Paul. I'm going to read this again to you. I'm going to show you why I say this. But when they saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said unto Peter before them all, if you, now he says this before these powerful men, if you, being a Jew, live after the manner of Gentiles, you just ate pork, you just ate with us, and not as the Jews, why do you compel the Gentiles to live as do the Jews? So what he's saying here is, he says, Paul, Paul was saying to Peter, he says, Peter, you have come down from Jerusalem, you've just eaten here with the Gentiles, and you lived like a Gentile by eating with the Gentiles, following Gentile rules and customs here. Now these other people are coming, and this he says in front of these powerful men. He says, why are you that live like a Gentile now compelling people to live like Jews? So what he's doing is, he's actually saying that they went around compelling Gentiles to live like Jews. It was not just a matter of one meal. It was a meal, and then there was time. I think it could be maybe some weeks that was going on there, or a week at least. There was some time, which Paul says, well, you are now compelling Gentiles to live like Jews. What was he saying? He was saying that Peter was going against the agreement, and that thing that Peter and these other very powerful men that comes from James has come here has now confused the local church, and people are now thinking that Paul is in error because he was not walking with the big shots when Jesus was on the earth. And they come now in unison from James, the real big shot, the head of the church in Jerusalem. And now they coming and they are separating themselves from the Gentile believers, causing havoc in the church. And Paul just said, I don't care how many has left me. I'm standing up for what the original truth was. So Paul is not misunderstanding anything here. He is simply standing up for the truth. And he is telling Peter to his face, I'm using my own words here. He says, if you live like a Gentile, you've just eaten here with us, why are you now kind of coming on an outreach to make these Gentile believers Jews if you live like a Gentile? Because you ate pork, you ate this, you did whatever was not right or kosher in Jewish customs. You sat at the same table with Gentiles. That's what you did. And so did other Jews. So what is it now with you? What's wrong with you, Peter? This is not the agreement we have had. Now, with all of this, we can see that the early church didn't get everything right. We can see that the early church in Jerusalem, we so many times today want to go back and say, if we can just go back to the days of the early church. We Gentiles that say that, I want to tell you, you would run the risk of being circumcised, because the early church in Jerusalem didn't understand the gospel as good as what we understand it today. They didn't understand it as clear and as well as what the Apostle Paul understands it. Paul understood the gospel the clearest of all, I believe. And he came and he was willing to suffer for this truth. He was willing to be persecuted for this truth. Now, I don't say that the apostles, Peter and James and John and those people weren't influenced by Paul. They did come right in the end. That is the good news, and that's what we have in their writings today. But there was a time when this wasn't clearly understood. And thank God for the Apostle Paul, and that he stood by the power of the Holy Spirit against the error of continuing in the law, continuing with Judaism and the customs of Moses in order to be saved. He stood against that. The harsh thing that we must face is that what we see in the life of Paul here is that Peter left him. A lot of the Jews that was there with him left him. The churches that there was, and this was the whole thing that he was about, why he went up to Jerusalem in Acts 15, was that he wouldn't have run or run in vain. And now we can see that his running in this town here is in vain, because these people has now come with their deception, and they are cheating the church, going back to what Paul calls the flesh and falling from grace. Well, that is Galatians 2 verse 14.